Today on the History Shorts Conversation series, we are honored to welcome Robert Edsel, best-selling author, historian, and founder of the Monuments Men and Women's Foundation, whose work has spent years preserving some of the most remarkable human stories of the Second World War. Many listeners will know him from the Monuments Men, which helped shine light on the effort to rescue Europe's stolen cultural treasures during the war. But in his latest book, Remember Us, Edsel turns his attention to another kind of preservation, the preservation of memory itself. The book tells the deeply moving story of American sacrifice, Dutch liberation, and the extraordinary bond forged between ordinary Dutch families and the young American soldiers who helped free the Netherlands from Nazi occupation. At its heart, this is not simply a story about battles or military campaigns, but a story about gratitude, remembrance, and the promises that communities make to those who never came home. It asks powerful questions about how nations remember sacrifice, and whether future generations will continue carrying those memories forward. A quick word from our sponsors. Robert, welcome to History Shorts.
Thank you very much, Peter.
So, this story is such an amazing story that I've never heard about before. Can you tell us how you came about finding out about this story and how that inspired you to, spend years on it? Because people don't realize that these books are not like a 6 month thing.
I uh, I can't even imagine writing a book in 6 months with the orientation it takes for something of the undertaking with Monuments Men First, which has gone on now for more than 20 years with the work of the foundation and continuing to tell these hero stories and continuing their mission. But this story about Remember Us consumed 9 years of my life. And I'm someone that I would never spend 9 years to write a book just for the sake of writing a book, or 5 years, 4 years, whatever it is, because life's too precious. The time is so fleeting. But uh, these have been causes, these have been messages that needed to be conveyed, and the books, Monuments Men and Saving Italy and the others, have been platforms from which to try and change the world, make it a little bit better. And one in the arena of preservation of our shared cultural heritage, and now in Remember Us, something even more important than that, if you can imagine, which is our freedom and where it comes from and who pays for it and how costly it is. I learned about this story in the course of us organizing the ceremony for the awarding of the Congressional Gold Medal to the Monuments Men and Women of all 14 nations. The nephew of the American Monuments officer who was killed in combat during World War II, Walter Hutchausen, his nephew Jim wrote me and said, of course, I'll be there at the ceremony. I just got back from England and I had a lovely visit with Frida, and here's a photo of her. And I thought, Frida, 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 I don't know any Fridas. He seems to think I know. And then I thought, well, the only Frida I've ever heard of was that 19-year-old girl who at the end of World War II wrote Harvard looking for the name and address of Walter Hutchausen's mother. And she wanted to let her know that she walked 5 miles to and from the cemetery several times a week to put flowers on his grave. He was buried at what we know today as the Netherlands American Cemetery that was 5 miles from her house. And he was a good friend of their family. They'd gotten to know him during the war as he was traveling through there, checking on damage to churches and other things. And I'd written about that in Monuments Men. I never met her, and it didn't seem important for me to try and find her. But here she was, 85 at the time. I knew her the last 8 years of her life. In fact, I was one of the people that delivered a eulogy for her several summers ago. And so she'd married a British soldier after the end of the war, which is why she was in England. So I said to my wife, I want to go meet this woman. And she said, do you have ambitions? And I said, ambitions like what? She said, write another book. I said, no, are you kidding? No way. I mean, what would I write about? She's the last person to have seen Hutchausen before he was killed. And I spent so many years interviewing a total of 21 Monuments Men and including 4 women. I just felt duty bound to hear what she had to say about him. So I went to this small town outside, hours from London. And she had all these photo albums and said, do you want to see the photos of when the Germans came? Because the tanks rolled right past our house. And when the Americans came and liberated us, because tanks rolled right past our house. And I said, yeah, I'm a fiend for photos. And so we looked at them, and she said, are you aware of the American military cemetery? And I said, you mean the Netherlands American Cemetery? And she said, well, that's what you all call it now. But when we knew it, it was the American Military Cemetery. I said, yes, I'm aware of it. Have you been there? Yes. Are you sure? Yes, I'm very sure I've been there. So, well, you probably know about the grave adoption program. And I said, the what? And she said, the grave adoption program. And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. So she started to explain it to me as she understood it. She said, I was an adopter. Everyone in my family was an adopter. And I said, are you trying to tell me that there was an adopter out there for every one of the boys and girls that was buried? And she said, well, I think so. I mean, there were thousands of soldiers buried there, and which I did not know it was that extensive. And I mean, I knew how many were buried there when I'd been out the cemetery, which is 10,000. But in fact, there were almost 18,000 at the end of the war. Um, and the number was reduced because a lot of families asked to have their boys sent back. But I came back and thought, I I got to know more about this. I'm just curious, how did this happen, and how did they come up with this idea for this grave adoption program? And that's how it began 9 years ago. Just the most amazing, uplifting story about the ability of a handful of people to change the world we live in.
So I guess two follow-up questions. One would be, how did they come up with this? But that's my second part. The first part is more directly to you. How does one start on this research? I mean, like you said, we're talking thousands, right? Like, so you have this idea. You're like, you know what? I'm inspired. I'm gonna dig a little bit more. And your wife's probably like, there goes 9 years of his life. Like, but like, where does one start?
Well, I think a critical component is passion and curiosity. I didn't find the Monuments Men story, it found me. It was looking for a messenger. I happened to ask this fateful question: how during World War II did so many works of art survive the most destructive war in history, and who are the people that saved it? And I had and asked with an ambition. I was just curious. I was reading all these books about World War II, and I was studying art and architecture in Florence after I sold my business, looking for a more meaningful life. And I asked all these people I'd met in Florence, that some of whom have become friends. And to the person, they all said, I don't know, that's a great question. What's the answer? I said, well, you live here, you should know. And they said, I never thought about it. And I hadn't either. And after this went on for several years, I thought, World War II is the most documented, photographed, written about event in history. If this isn't something that everyone knows, they should know it, including me. I'll throw myself into that and see what happens. And the more I dug into it, the more extraordinary it was. So I was the right person at the right time for that to happen. And then we created the foundation and continued the mission of the Monuments Men and Women, and made sure that they'd been thanked by the country through the Congressional Gold Medal. That took 8 years of going to Washington to meet with members of Congress to convince them these are real people. Years to persuade George Clooney about the opportunity of making the movie, and then several years working with him on the movie, and then of course finding and recovering looted art and so on. So I'll be 70 in December this year, and 9 years ago I just turned 60 or so. And I would in no way say, I felt like I'd done what I was supposed to do, but I wasn't out there looking for anything any more than I was looking for the Monuments Men. But Frida's story was so amazing. And the more I dug into it, I just thought, the idea that no one in history has done something seems too unbelievable to believe, because there's billions of people that have come before us, and more or less about everything that can be done has been done at least once, and usually more times than that. And in our research, we couldn't find a single comp for anybody venerating foreigners to any scale, like what the Dutch have done honoring Americans at the Netherlands American Cemetery, where every single grave has a Dutch adopter, and they have been For 81 years, they've honored this promise: leave your boys with us. We'll watch over them like our own forever. And forever to the Dutch so far means 81 years. And they are in the third and fourth generation of family members. There's a waiting list that's hundreds of people long, very little turnover. So when you juxtapose that against the most destructive war in history and some of the most horrific human behavior possible, and yet through all that darkness, you have this transcendent moment of remembrance, gratitude, and grace where the impossible gets performed in a positive way. That is really, I think, a moment to pause and do more than just tip our hat. I mean, learn more about that. And of course, that leads to a larger question, which is something I'm working on now, which is how in the heck in our flag waving country do we not have a grave adoption program for Americans by Americans? And of course, there are a lot of reasons and excuses and et cetera, but the Dutch have handed us the playbook. And it'll look different here than it does over there. We're a much larger country. But they did it. And I don't think any American would take kindly to someone saying we can't do it, because I believe we can. But these things need messengers, and you need to be relentless. And, it takes a long time. No one knows where that tipping point comes. And Monuments Men, we reached it at a point in time. But I had friends coming to me, my close friends, saying, "You're going to go bankrupt spending your money on this thing. And the only explanation you have is there'll be a movie, because you've been saying that for 3 years and there's no movie." And I said, "Well, I'm wrong on timing. I agree. And I will have to quit if something doesn't happen. But I'm not wrong that there will be one." And ultimately, that was proven.
Well, talking about that blueprint, how did this start? You said the Dutch, will give us the blueprint, but like the story is so amazing. How did this come about? And in a sense, how do you? Is there even an answer to explain how and why this has been kept up for so long? Like, can we even figure out how to answer that question?
Well, I think let me take it in reverse order. I think the last question is a good one. I think part of it is it's been so intra-family for the most part, not exclusively, but that's kind of what's happened. It's passed down through family members that even people in Amsterdam don't necessarily know about it. It's not like everyone in the Netherlands knows. It's in the southern portion of the country. There happen to be some adopters in different parts of the country, but they're outliers. Secondly, I think what they did is so damn unbelievable that and we're all busy and we're going too fast. Everybody, I think, is, and I'm guilty of it too. That people tell you something that is a showstopper, and it's like, yeah, 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 great, fine. Well, no, no, this is a stop what you're doing, and let me say it again. In a world where people promise all sorts of stuff, not the least of which is I do, half of those end up in divorce. So that's a promise. The Dutch, that didn't even know most of these Americans, promised we'll watch over your loved one for the rest of our lives and pass it on to our kids and their kids, and we'll do that forever. And for 81 years, 81 out of 81, that's exactly what they've done. Who does that in anything? So, I don't know. Maybe we're entering a period of history where no one places value in promises. But that is extraordinary by any standard. And when you can say it's never been done before in the course of mankind, and when it took place was amid the most destructive war in history, that's pretty exceptional stuff. And I think with all that's been written about World War II history, now I'm getting into your second question. I think most people figure, I don't know, he sounds a little wacko. How in the world has someone else not told this story before? Well, part of the answer is if you focus on the telling of the story as a story about a cemetery, you know, um, gag me with a spoon sounds pretty depressing to me. And I had lots of publishers reject the book because they said, well, it sounds depressing. Everybody dies. And I said, well, I haven't even written the book. So how do you know that? Well, it's a cemetery. And I said, "So you're the person that went to go see Titanic and thought everybody was gonna get off the ship?" And they said, "Well, that's a love story." And I said, "There's a love story in this book too. Lots of love stories, actually, but a man-woman love story." People, in particular, editors judge books or titles by the cover, concepts by the cover. So it's not a book about a cemetery. I met with Kathleen Kennedy Marshall years ago, who was Steven Spielberg's partner on a number of films, producer of Saving Private Ryan and some of the Star Wars movies. I mean, so many, E.T., I believe, one of the great minds in Hollywood. And she asked me before I'd written Monuments Men, but knew I was thinking about it, "What's your story about?" And I said, "Well, it's a story about World War II, that." And she interrupted me and asked me again. And I started in and said the same thing. And she did this 3 times. And I said, "Well, if you'd stop interrupting me, I'd tell you the answer to your question." And she said, "You can't write a story about World War II. It's too big." And I said, "Okay, smart person. You produced Saving Private Ryan. What's that a story about?" And she said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, it's a story about World War II." And she said, "No, it's not." And the answer was 4 brothers, 3 dead, 1 missing. Go find him. Her point was the backdrop's World War II, but that's not what the story's about. And this story isn't about a cemetery. The backdrop's World War II. The cemetery is the setting, but it's not about the dead people there. It's about the living people and what they did to honor everyone that's there. We've never heard that story because Hollywood, think about it. Every movie you've ever seen involving war, you see a soldier get killed and then cut to the next scene. Okay, well, I asked this question. What happens to a soldier when he's killed? Okay, we go to Arlington, we go to Normandy, wherever it is, we see this beautifully manicured graves. Well, they didn't get beamed over there. So what happens? How's the body get wherever it's going? Who has to do that work? What's involved? It's a car wreck that we don't want to look at, but once someone poses a question, you won't stop thinking about it till you see it. And I wanted to know those details. Someone had to do the work. What a horrible job. In fact, it's not horrible, it's the worst job during the war. So that's what interested me. And the more I dug into it, I thought, okay, we need to know this story because this really has a chance to change our country in such a positive way. And that's what we've been doing for 9 years.
Robert, how did you pick your characters? I mean, you had a plethora, right, to choose from.
Yeah,
How
I
did
mean,
you? Yeah,
arguably 10,000. I mean,
yeah,
ridiculous number. Um, I wanted to make sure that people understood that uh, we're a country of immigrants. We were, we are, we always will be. And so I wanted to make sure people were reminded of that we had paratroopers, we had bombers, we had tankers, we had grave diggers, we had a chaplain. Those were all people I picked. But we had Black Americans, we had Hispanic Americans in our story, we had a Native American, important to remember. Um, we
a
had
young Native American.
we had 2 boys that were twins, 21, but we had a monuments man who was 39 and a bachelor. So, we covered the spectrum because we felt you want to talk to America, that's America, some of everything. And I felt that that was important. We found some fantastic characters, but it was important to me to also show the diversity of the country and how that was our strength. That was our strength, and shared sacrifice. Not everybody liked each other. Nobody thought everyone was perfect. I'm the first person to say this book's not a hagiography about Americans. I'm not pretending there's 10,000 boys and 4 women buried at Margrot that were all saints. They weren't. There are probably some really detestable people out there. But when it mattered, they gave up the thing that mattered to them most, their freedom, and ultimately sacrificed their lives for a common cause. And that is something for us to pause and recognize that extraordinary sacrifice and not get focused on whether they how what they were doing in their life, good person, bad person, etc., because they made this sacrifice that benefited all of us even today.
Can you think of one story where, when you found that story and started digging into it, you said to yourself, "This is it. This is definitely going, and like that one moment where you're like, this is why I'm doing this.
Yes. Well, there were a number. My wife at the beginning of the project used to ask me, "Did you cry today?" Doing research, and within 6 to 8 months, it shifted to, "How many times did you cry today?" We were reading these personnel files of thousands of the soldiers out there to try and find the best right examples, and the one criteria was, uh, not everyone in my book dies. Some live, some die, because we wanted that element of suspense, and it's all factually based. But um, everyone had to somehow be connected to where the cemetery is. They had to pass through there. They had to work there. They had to be buried there. Something for a narrative arc. And there were stories that I couldn't include in the book that were as painful to exclude as they were to learn about. So I'll tell you one that's not in the book, um, because it was one of the ones that, I look at them like signposts. This being an author, there are a lot of discouraging moments in the pursuit of excellence in anything. I've done it in athletics, I've done it in business, I've done it in philanthropy here. There are plenty of give up moments, I call them, in the trench moments. It's the Our society is so focused on outcomes, we don't focus on process. So everybody wants to be the star athlete. They want to be Rafa Nadal playing at Wimbledon on the second Sunday. But if you understood all the sacrifices and all the pain, the ice baths, the surgeries, the times you don't go out with your buddies, you don't drink, et cetera, et cetera. Most people would say, you know what? I do want that, but if that's what I have to do for it, I don't want it that bad. That's where passion comes in. Passion, you don't know anything else other than I still want to do it. Yeah, those things suck, but I love doing it, and it's what I was made. It's why I'm on earth. It's what I'm supposed to be doing. So in in coming across these stories, each time we'd find one, that was a way of, in a way of a form of reassurance. Like, yep, this is, I'm not turned off by this. I'm not turned on by it, but I know this is a message. This is a pat on the back about hang in there, stay with it. So there was a Army Air Force general who was an ace fighter pilot during World War I named Brady. And he was, by World War II, he was a general. And his son went into the Army Air Force and became a fighter pilot. And he wrote this beautiful, eloquent letter to his son about how proud he was of him, for the son he'd always been, for going into the military, how outstanding a pilot he was, how he was going to do great. Always do your best. I'm there. I'm proud of you, etc. The kind of letter that all dads, I hope, would want to write for their sons, and every son would cherish it the rest of their life to have a letter like that. They each went on about their own way and found each other both in London at Christmas in 1944. So the Battle of Bulge is has turned in our favor, but still heavy fighting. And they're on the steps of a restaurant in London, and they're in the bar, and they come out. They've had dinner together, and they start singing Christmas carols on Christmas Eve. Beautiful scene, great story. And then a couple of months later, the father gets a notice that his son's been killed. Worse still, the preliminary reports are that one of the other fighter pilots in his air wing was the one that killed him when they were in a dogfight, and a German Messerschmitt passed in front of them, and the other pilot shot at it and was convinced. He was the one that said, I am the one that did this, convinced that it was his firing that had killed General Brady's son. So this news was delivered to General Brady, and Brady made a point of going to see the pilot. And he called him in and he said, it's not your fault. These things happen. You need to put it out of your mind. You've got a job to do. You're a great pilot. I don't hold you accountable. Get back in there in the fight. and don't let this ruin your life. That alone is, if we could capture that and put it in a dictionary under the definition of magnanimity, you might have the perfect definition. Well, it turns out, upon investigation, it was not this boy that killed his son. He was killed by one of the German fighter pilots. Nonetheless, his son was dead. And at the very end of the war, in this file that we're reading all of these documents, sometimes over several days because they're just so emotional, there's only so much of it you can take in any one day. Um, he sent a telex to his wife and said, "I found our boy." And that was what he did the minute the war was over, was to go and find where his boy had been buried. So we didn't include that in the book because there was no connection to Margraten. He'd been buried there briefly, but been brought back. So it was one of those stories we came across that was just unbelievably moving. And that's one that didn't make the cut. Imagine some of the ones that we did include in the book. And they're just as moving, if not more. And this is one story of, thousands and thousands of stories. So if you like military, if you like combat stories, the book's, great. It's fantastic. It's got all that. If you're a woman, you're going to love this book. And this is one thing I loved about it, because the two key characters in the book are both women. Frida, this 19-year-old girl, and Emily Mikkels van Kesnik, who made this promise to Americans: leave your boys with us, we'll watch over them like our own forever. And they're the two that helped me understand this story. Frida in person, and Emily from the grave through these albums and diaries that she kept. And I, to this day, as you can tell by my emotional response to your question, am so deeply moved by this story. And when I'm having my weak moments, and nobody escapes these, George Clooney has them too. I mean, no matter how old you get, you still have these self-doubts, and can I do it again? Why did I think I could do this, etc. I know every morning when I get up, I am where I should be, doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's sharing the story. So I think some of it is, it's just so damn incredible to think that after 80 years of history and the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of books that have been written about World War II, that this story's never been told. Sounds like a tall tale, but it's not.
Wow, that really was very touching. The last question, I guess, would be the fact that, just like with Monuments Men, this doesn't end for you with just a book. Can you talk a little bit about the Forever Promise project?
Sure. The way I justify the number of years it's going to take is, the book's really the opening salvo. It's a platform from which to do good. And I will say, if you'd asked me at the outset, how long will it take to do this, I would have told you maybe 5 years. So it's not like I willingly walk into this and say, yeah, 9 years, this is going to be great. Uh, we always have optimistic person, think tends to underestimate difficulty and time period required. And that's certainly been the case with me. The Forever Promise Project is the result of us knowing that because the American Army did not want to provide the grave adopters with the names and addresses of American next of kin, they couldn't fulfill what their final vision of this idea was. Originally, it started with the idea that, wouldn't it be nice, and I'm not trivializing this, if we had one person look over the grave in the memory of one soldier, and do that however many times we have people out there. But in the fall, in the late summer of 45, so 3 or 4 months after the war's over, letters start arriving from American families that have gotten the worst news possible, who are desperate for information. They can't get it from the War Department because that's not the business they're in. It's one-way communication. We regret to inform you that, ... And they know that, they've gone to the public libraries. They found where this little town named Margraten is, about 15 miles from the German border. and not having any other options, they just start firing off letters to mayors of towns anywhere near there, including in Margraten. One letter read something like this: I'm a 25-year-old widow. I live in Demopolis, Alabama. My husband was killed on his 24th birthday uh, a month before the war was over. He was my everything. I would be beholding to you all the days of my life, realizing that you live near the cemetery if you could go out and take a photograph of his grave. And that letter found its way to Emily. And she went out there and she took her two young daughters and took a photograph and sent it to this lady. This lady at 25 years old had the presence of mind to mail a copy of the photograph and the letter to Life magazine, which for your young listeners, it was the Google of its time. Everybody subscribed to Life magazine. And she wrote a letter to the editor saying, you know, there's a lot of other young widows out there suffering like me and moms. And there's this really nice lady in Maastricht who answered my prayer and my letter and sent me this photo. And I just know she'd be willing to help other people that are missing their boys. Thousands of letters arrived within weeks to the town hall in Maastricht. And it was at that point in time, the concept of the grave adoption program changed to what it is today, which is all well and good that we're adopting the bodies of dead boys. And again, I don't mean to trivialize that, but where the real need is to reach across the ocean into the American homes and try and assuage the grief they're experiencing. To do that, they had to have the names and addresses of next of kin. The Army didn't want to make that information available. So Emily, being a force of nature, thought, well, having tried and exhausted all of our efforts with the Army, I'll write President Truman. And she did. And President Truman punted the thing over to the Army, and the Army wrote her back and said, sorry, nice that you're doing that, but we can't help you. So in a fit of frustration in June 1946, Emily left her 11 kids behind, got on an airplane, first one she'd ever been on, and flew to the United States, and for 5 weeks traveled around and lived in a different home every night. After the first few days of her trip, which were planned, it was all winging it. Well, I think you can go from here to here and here to here and stay with these people. And by then, she was on national radio programs. Everybody was hearing about this story. And yet, today, until we started the Forever Promise program, there are only about 1,800 of the 10,000 American boys and 4 women in Margraten that have been connected with their Dutch adopters. So about 8,000 that had no way of reaching the American relatives. So we thought we'll create we will create a program, we'll call it the Forever Promise Project. We're following what Emily did. And we will partner, which we did, with the Dutch Foundation that manages all the adopters. We said, well, we'll help you find them. And so we created this partnership. And now you can go to the foreverpromise.org website. And there's a very short questionnaire. Do you have a relative that's buried there? Are you familiar with the grave adoption program? Would you like to be connected with the adopter of your family? Will you give us permission to share your contact information with our colleagues in the Netherlands? So in just 6 months, we've connected about 500 American families. So we've gone from 1,800, which took 80 years, to 2,300. And that 500 has happened in 6 months. So it's a public awareness challenge. That's what it is. We don't need at this stage to find genealogists to go look for people. We just need to have a broad awareness in the United States so people can go to the Forever Promise Project. We have a searchable database of all 10,000 boys and 4 women that are buried there. And you can search it by state, where they were born, where they lived, by their name, whatever it is, and find people. So, I say I travel a lot in this country. I think there are a lot of people the majority of people are not happy with how things are. That's not a political statement. It's not a matter of which side of the aisle you're on, but people are not happy. And except for the 10% of grenade throwers on each end of the spectrum, progress is made by that group in the middle. And I think they are yearning to find some way to do something good for the country. And my answer is this is it. Um, that's how the thing worked. Everybody there did something. That's all we're asking people to do is something. If you have money, we need more money as a foundation to get more researchers to bring more visibility and go faster. If you have social media skills and followers, post about this. If you have friends who are journalists or podcasters, introduce the story to them and let us go on and talk about it. If you have time and want to help us find people, by all means, we have toolkits on the foreverpromise.org website. We don't charge anybody for any of this. So go there, get the toolkit. If you social media people, we've basically written the post for you. If you want the guidance, it's there. If you want to know how to write an op-ed letter to a paper or something, we've got draft op-ed letters. If you want stories, we've got some of the stories there. So it's all there. We're really proud about what we're doing. We're trying to, as I say, change the world in our little arena, uh, one step at a time, but we need more and more people to do it. And if Americans, if it's all well and good to celebrate Memorial Day at the baseball park and think about it being 3-day weekend, schools out, etc. And you can go a little bit further and sing the national anthem, but you're getting off easy. There's a lot more we can do that's more material than that. And this isn't the only way, but it's one way. So I'd encourage people to go to foreverpromise.org, read about it, see what we're doing. And I'll tell you, these connections that are made are immediate best friends. And we've seen it over and over again. We get photographs from people in the States that have gone to meet the people in the Netherlands and travel with them, vice versa. They're just incredibly heartwarming stories.
Robert, this was an amazing interview, and I'll make sure I will include all the links to all that in the description. But yeah, probably the most one of the most intense interviews I've ever done, and emotional ones. And I've done this for a few years. So thank you so much for taking the time, for writing this book, for sharing these stories, and I hope that to see another movie somewhere for the wider audiences based on this story as well. Thank you.
I'll say the same thing I said about Monuments Men. There will be one. I just can't predict when, but it's coming.
Love that. Thank you so much for
All right.
spending the
Thank you,
time.
Peter.